Welcome to this live stream of the Global Gambit. My name is Pyotr Kurzin. I am your host and someone who's had a mixed career in different areas: geopolitics, international relations, strategic studies. But right now, what we're talking about predominantly on the channel is the situation within Iran, the ongoing war. Karen, you've been pretty on the inside of some pretty massively important things, and before we came on air you mentioned about the war in Iraq being one of them. So you've written some pretty remarkable things on your Substack as well, and I'm curious, when you look at the first 10 days of this war, what is it that you've mainly taken away so far?
Well, obviously, what everybody knows, you don't go to war without a clear objective. And we had many objectives, none of which were clear, and none of them were connected to each other. And some have been since abandoned. We weren't really into all of these objectives. It was just kind of propaganda points. And any country that goes to war like that is going to have problems starting on day one, and they're just going to compound. So we're seeing the fact that we didn't know what we were going to do is making this look even worse than it is, but it is very bad. And part of that relates to the fact that I don't think the military knew what the objective was either. Just like the American people found out, I think on, early Saturday morning, Donald Trump gave an 8-minute talk, message to the people. Yeah, I've taken you to war. Here's why. And he gave 5 or 6 reasons. The Pentagon seems equally ignorant about what the real purpose is of what we're trying to accomplish, what we're doing. And also, of course, it's not the first time we've gone to war with an ally, but generally that's more complicated, right? I mean, we now said, well, we're going to war with our ally, Israel. And I think it didn't take more than 4 or 5 days before we realized, and it was increasingly well published, that Israel's objectives were not the same on this particular war as the Americans were. Now, we're not clear what the U.S. objectives really are. We don't know the hierarchy. What's more important? Have they thrown out some and given them up, and maybe they've evolved new ones? It's not clear just if you're looking at the United States, but it's also problematic that Israel has its own set of objectives. And we are definitely not clear. I mean, the average American is not clear on what Israel's objectives are. Now, I've worked in the Pentagon, and I've been kind of, I've seen things in the run up to the Iraq war that shows that Israel has not only their own objectives, but they work very effectively inside the Pentagon. I witnessed that, but inside of our government as well, to kind of promote their objectives and use the United States military as a means to an end. Some will say we use Israel as a means to an end, and I think that's also true. But Israel's objectives are really problematic because we aren't as invested as they are. And we don't even, I don't think Trump said, we need Israel to expand to the Litani River in Lebanon. I don't think Trump said, one of the objectives is that Israel will continue its great expansion into the territory of its neighbors. And yet that's exactly what Israel has spent, really about a third, maybe 35-40% of their battle capability. They've spent it in Lebanon. So was that one of our objectives also? It's not clear. Anyway, it's a big problem.
So you very simply think that the Israelis are largely the arbitrators of this, that they are driving the American government, the US, the Trump administration to continue this?
Well, I certainly think, and I think most people are aware of this, Israel has an agenda in the region. It has an economic agenda. It has a political agenda. And Israel is very influential in the United States, not just whoever's sitting in the White House, but also obviously our Congress. So we do, in DC, certainly put Israel first. It is make Israel great again, not MAGA. It is about Israel. The money that drives American politics is a big factor in that. And a lot of that money is leveraged by American and Israeli Zionists for purposes of, working on and expanding the Zionist project. The other factor is, and this is, I'm back in the Cold War, we used to have, well, the Cold War was against the Soviets, and the Soviets had spies. And what was one of the things the military, my first 10 years in the military were during the Cold War, and we were often warned, be careful, you don't make friends with a Russian, because they will use that against you to blackmail you, to cause you to become a source for them or whatever. And I'm not an intelligence officer. At that point in time, I was a communications officer, working on providing intel and not intel, but communication security devices to the folks that flew the RC-135. That was my initial job. And we were briefed, even though we would very unlikely come into contact with Russians, we were still told that. So we knew that Russians, Soviets under the Cold War, would seek to influence Americans. Okay, now, so it happens. Now, what do the Israelis do? Yes, very much seek to influence Americans, whether they're in the Pentagon, in the State Department, certainly the president. And if you look at the president's current circle of advisors, it is really almost entirely made up of Zionists, people who really, truly believe that Israel's destiny is America's destiny, that we are entwined together in an unbreakable bond. And of course, that to me is a very false concept, but that is what drives our policy. So yeah, Israel is are they dragging us into this war? Are they encouraging us? Sure. And I also think that they provided the kind of intelligence and information, not that it was true or even qualified, but they fed Donald Trump the kind of information that they knew Donald Trump would be receptive to. And
but wasn't it the CIA that provided the intelligence that helped the Israelis strike?
The CIA and the other, well, Tulsi Gabbard, we could say, well, wasn't it Tulsi Gabbard that's providing that? She is the person that's on top of the CIA and all of the 18 intelligence agencies to filter. The idea is she would filter and ensure that good information goes to the president. She's obviously been cut out of that chain, and it is the CIA. But even the CIA had qualifications on what they said. The Pentagon had qualifications. Well, if this happens, it might work. If everything else goes right, it might work. And they're already beginning to throw Donald Trump under the bus a little bit. We saw the release just a few days ago on the, I don't know if the Post or I think it was the Washington Post had it, the report prior to this invasion saying that.
The one by the National Intelligence Council.
Right. And those kinds of leaks, you expect that kind of thing to happen after the fact, especially when the war is unpopular, especially when it's not going well. Because the first thing Donald Trump is going to do, and he hasn't done it yet, he hasn't fired Pete Hegseth yet, but what Donald Trump will do, and I don't think it's going to take too long, is he is going to throw some of his own people under the bus for leading him down a primrose path. That's about the only thing he can do if he wants to save his presidency. He's going to have to shift the blame. Now, speaking of shifting blame, he has made a fool out of himself, Donald Trump has, with his accusation that Iran bought or stole or borrowed Tomahawk missiles and hit their own school, killing, 200 people, including about 170 school children, girls. And Trump keeps saying that. Even around him, his own administration, the Pentagon, everybody's saying, no, that was a mistake, or not a mistake, but it was our Tomahawk that did it. And I think Captain Ritter, who Scott Ritter has said that there, and I heard this elsewhere too, but he said there were 4 Tomahawk missile strikes, and the last one was a double tap on the school, because that's where, as they're watching it, they could see people were running around there. And this is something that we see Israel do. They've done quite openly in Gaza. The idea you hit something, and then when the aid people come, when the ambulances are there, or the other people rush to save the wounded, you hit them again. And so our strategies are very similar to our ally Israel, and they're becoming more and more similar as every day passes. But yeah, Trump is being hung out to dry in some ways by his own people. Maybe they can't control him, but he's embarrassing himself. And I think that he'll have to fire some of the people that got him into this. Certainly Ratcliffe at CIA should be one of them, and Hegseth another.
So just on this relationship because I think that not enough people are looking at the dynamics here between Israel and America, perhaps a bit. But I thought the Israelis don't have Tomahawks, though. I thought and the Americans can have Tomahawks.
Only Americans. Yeah. No. Trump said, I'm sorry, let me make it clear. No, Trump did not blame Israel. He blamed Iran. He said Iran previously had purchased Tomahawks, maybe they purchased it from somebody that we had sold them to around the world and did it to them. That is what Trump said. He said it repeatedly. And I think even yesterday he was in a press conference and said it, and he was questioned about it. And his answer to it, one of the reporters actually said, look, this is kind of crazy. We've already confirmed it was one of ours. And he goes, well, I don't know. I don't know what that is. They're still sorting that out. So, yeah, Trump is disconnected from, well, if this is really a war, Trump, it's certainly a war of choice. We've certainly committed troops. We're certainly spending $2 billion a day fighting this war. But if this is really a war, I think it's natural and it's okay to expect that the president is tightly connected to his Pentagon and his CIA and his advisors in the conduct of this war. That is what you expect from a leader. And we're not seeing that with Trump. We are seeing Trump. I mean, he's still talking about the draperies in his ballroom that he's building, and that it doesn't inspire confidence.
No, it doesn't. But the thing that makes me kind of curious isn't it? How much has this got to do with the government that's in Israel, right? I wonder whether or not such a situation as this would have been occurring had we not such an ultra-nationalist government. Ben Gvir, Smotrich, these people that advise or, bolster Netanyahu's position, let alone his own threat considerations with the indictment that threatens him. How much does that play a factor, do you think?
Well, I used to think that the Likud party and the far-right politicians in Israel are really the ones that egg on the expansion of Israel, the expansion of the Zionist state, constant wars and battles, and manipulation of the U.S. government in those wars and battles. And I said, well, that's Likud. That's Likud. And it turns out it's not Likud. It is all of the major parties. There is actually one anti-war candidate that sits in the Knesset, one anti-war Knesset member. That's it. The left and right parties are agreed on all of the important questions. And, for Israel, in a way, because they have constantly sought war, they say they don't seek war, but they do. They beat up on all their enemies, their enemies / neighbors, which is the same thing in their case. And they beat up on them, they attack them, they take their land, they abuse them, they spy on them, steal from them, all these things. It's a constant thing. So you have, for Israelis, a war mentality. And this goes beyond the apartheid mentality, which is a different thing, ethno-superior type attitudes. That's one thing. But if you put any country, regardless of their predispositions, if you put any country in a wartime footing for years and years and years and decades and decades and decades, it does unite people in a way that is defensive, in a way that sees everything around them as an attack on them. And so there is no division, there's no daylight between the left and right parties in Israel. And actually, the guy, Naftali Bennett, who was the competitor, I think he's been a previous prime minister, I'm not sure if prime minister or president. Anyway, he is a public political opponent of Netanyahu. He's run against him, he has debated him, he says, I'm different than you, I offer something different. He is 100% on board with every war that they fought. And he was interviewed not too long ago, televised, saying much the same thing. So the people of Israel are behind it, just like the people of Iran, contrary to Donald Trump's, whatever people told him would happen, united when we decapitated the regime and hit the girls' school. That did not cause Iranians to divide themselves. It caused them to come together, similar in a way that, after 9/11, Americans came together. When you are attacked, you put aside your differences and you focus on that external enemy. Israel, that's how Israel operates. So their parties are pretty much the same when it comes to war. There's no peace party in Israel.
But doesn't peace party in this instance also mean one that is a bit of a capitulating to the threat of the Iranian and the Islamic Republic to spin things around, right, and take the other positioning? Do you not find that the Islamic Republic has been a source of instability in the Middle East?
To some extent, but if you're in the Middle East, you would say, well, when did a lot of this instability start? And they're going to say, well, 1948. It started when they invaded Palestine and kicked people off the land, and the first Nakba and all these other things. So it is a matter of perspective. There is no doubt, and we're watching it right now every day. I think they're on phase 30 of the Iranian missile barrages and drone barrages that fly over the region and hit Israel. So there is no doubt that Iran is capable of physically harming Israel. But first off, they didn't start this, okay? And they have never started a war in the region. They have always responded after either the US or Israel attacked them. And actually, historically, in my lifetime, they have actually not responded. And I don't know if you remember from, well, of course you do, from June, the 12-day war in June, they did respond in a very narrow way, and they announced what they were going to hit prior to and made diplomatic phone calls to the Al Udeid Air Base, and they said, we're going to hit this part of your air base, and that will be the performative response, the performative retaliation that we will do. We're not going to go hog wild with these other things, but we have to have some response. But what they're doing now is actually what a normal country does if they have the capacity to do it when they are attacked out of the blue, and for the second time in recent memory, in the midst of diplomatic negotiations. Now, obviously, the U.S. and Israel weren't really conducting diplomatic, that was part of the war preparation. That was a fraud. But, Iran took that seriously. I mean, they were actually negotiating. I was surprised at the kinds of things that were reported by the Omani moderator and even by Wickoff, the things that Iran was agreeing to that they had never agreed to before. So it could be said, we don't know for sure, but it could be said that Iran was negotiating in good faith. But it is very clear that we were not. So, they're reacting in a way. They are palliating for an unexpected and unprovoked attack. Now, Israel, like any other country, is free to believe that Iran is behind all these problems and that Iran is our mortal enemy. And if we just wake up one morning, they're going to destroy us. They're free to believe that. But the evidence doesn't really support that at all. What the evidence does support is what Israel and the United States have been doing actively for 35 years. And really, if you want to go back to 1953, when we got rid of the Mossadegh, democratic elected leader of Iran, we put in the Shah, and we helped the Shah. And of course, Israelis did too. I mean, the Shah's reputation is a tough leader running his torture campaigns and his secret police. We're helping him. The United States and Israel assisted him with that. And in return, we profited with oil and energy priority and that kind of thing. So, we can go way back, and it doesn't look like Iran is causing all these problems. What it looks like is Israel and the United States are causing a ton of problems. And frankly, I know I'm talking a lot of stuff here that maybe people don't care about, but I'll tell you, during the Iran-Iraq war, you remember what Kissinger said about that, right? I mean, we want both of them to fight each other and we want both of them to suffer terribly. So we were arming Iran in some ways, and we were also providing poison gas and arms to Saddam Hussein. This is how we play games, and we act like, oh, we're so innocent. Well, we're not. But
doesn't Iran play games by creating proxy networks and undertaking plausible deniability and being
plausible deniability is our specialty. But yeah, they do support their particularly their Shia around the world. But think about it. I mean, I'm not an expert on the religious stuff, but when we assassinated Khamenei, who had been he was also the top Shia cleric. He's the top guy for Shias, not just in Iran, of course, but around the world where there are Shia. So, and there's a number of places that they're Shia. So, for example, Bahrain is about 50 to 60% Shia. We also declared war in many ways against global Shia. We certainly, it's like, I mean, if you're a global Catholic and somebody kills the Pope on Easter, in a big strike that destroys the Vatican and kills the Pope and all of the popes to be, that are around him, then that would be seen as a pretty angering thing for global Catholics. And that's what we did with Shia. But I don't think we did that thinking it would have that ramification, because we don't really, I mean, particularly the Zionist attitude towards others is that really they don't matter. And I think we've adopted much of that same attitude in Washington, D.C. So, yeah, we.
So if we switch
battles here.
No, for sure. But if we switch towards some of your expertise, which is as someone who was in the U.S. Air Force, when you look at the aerial campaign that the coalition, if you want to call it, has done, what's some of your assessments? Has it been a success? Okay, they took out the head of the snake, as people use this metaphor, but from my understanding, no regime change, if that's still the agenda, although I don't think it is. Do you think no regime has been toppled by air power?
Well, we know that. Yes, it's true. It hasn't been, and it never has been. And certainly we fought very long wars using air power. Now you can go back to Vietnam. That was, in the end, a failure, unsuccessful. And that was an air campaign for the most part. Although we had, we had as many as, I think, 600,000 troops in Vietnam at one time. But it was primarily an air-driven campaign. And the Air Force really the idea that at that time in the 60s and 70s that the Air Force could do it alone and we could save lives by exterminating the people from above. It didn't work, and we didn't learn our lesson. We did not learn our lesson at all on that. So then you have Afghanistan. We've had much smaller numbers of troops in Afghanistan, but that was also very much an air campaign, and it did the same thing. 20 years to change out the Taliban for the Taliban. So we know that it doesn't work, but there are larger people than just the Air Force. The Air Force says, we'll do this. We can lead the way. And the Navy air power does the same thing. We can help do that. But what's missing in our way of war in this country is the understanding of not just global politics, but the understanding of how governments work. Our leaders, our political leaders, are very ignorant in many ways. And what we have advising them, whether it's CIA, Pentagon, the defense intelligence agencies, the military industrial complex, these people that get our presidents elected, when they advise the presidents, they're not thinking about really achieving an objective over there. They are thinking about their own financial bottom line. So if the Pentagon uses up a bunch of weapons, they have new justification to go buy more. When they go buy more, and Congress, of course, lets them do that and funds it and overfunds it, then all of these military industrial complex people stand to see their stock prices go up, which they do. So, in fact, the article that I wrote, that my current one on the Substack, is very much about this, really a permanent war kind of economy. So the folks that advise the president that air war and sea air combined can get him his objectives, they really have an ulterior motive. And that is to make sure that they get a lot more money. The kind of cost that it takes to put an army into a foreign country, an expeditionary armed force, boots on the ground, which unfortunately Trump is increasingly talking about. The cost of that, of course, is to destroy your own country, right? We don't have large families with lots of kids that we want to send to die for another country in another country. And that's exactly what sending them to Iran would be. So politicians realize that they need money. They can get it by air wars and naval wars, but to get political votes, they can't kill off all the children. They can't send them to die in wars of choice, which is what we've had pretty much for many, many decades. And certainly that's what this war is.
I mean, I think that the war in Vietnam was quite different when you say, though, because there was quite a large it's a huge ground presence.
No, we had, yes, for many years we had a ground force, but when the pressure was on not to lose people, our men on the ground, the Air Force, which was very young, remember how new the Air Force was. We didn't have an Air Force until after 1947. So the Air Force was still relatively new. The Air Force, as its leadership, sold to LBJ, we can do this from a distance and we can save the Army guys. And actually, if you think about it, LBJ, who I'm certainly no fan of, was very much a person who grew up very poor, and he actually pursued Vietnam and spent more money on Vietnam in a way to simultaneously get domestic funding for his war on poverty. Now, who were the draftees in the Vietnam War? You know, you can debate who they were, but I know who they weren't. They weren't the wealthy. They were the poor in this country, both white and black. They were the poor, and they were drafted and they were dying, and LBJ didn't want them to die. So, but he had to, this was the compromise. This was the evil compromise that he did. I will fund the Pentagon's war in Vietnam if I can get my domestic policies. And so that was his trade-off, his political trade-off domestically. So the Air Force comes in and says, oh, we can save these guys' lives. We can make sure that these guys don't die for nothing because we have the bombers, we have standoff missiles, and we have exfoliants. We can turn that jungle into dirt, all from the air. And so we tried to do that. It did not work. It destroyed lots of lives, but it did not prevail in the political objective, which of course was to have a non-communist government, a friendly government in Saigon. Didn't happen.
So one of the things that I've been pretty adamant on is that this is not a war that can be won, right? I think people like to look at it through their preferred lens. So some veterans, not all, in your case, a prime example, but some people who are very interested in the military standpoint look at the military focus only, or the military dimension. Or, I don't know, some people look at the geopolitics, right? This is a geopolitical channel first and foremost, but I think it's too unidimensional. And what I like to do is try to combine them to be a bit more comprehensive. And I think it's frustrating because on the one hand, yes, obviously Iran can't go toe to toe with the US military, right? If we put them in exactly the same kind of situation, a vacuum where there's no exogenous factors, but like we're not wargaming here. We're actually doing the war. So, you know, what's your opinion of the strategy to sort of try to outlast the Americans? Because I think that's what the Islamic Republic is trying to do.
Yeah, well, and they've pretty much told us everything we need. The Iranians have told us what they need. They said, one of the guys, I forget who it was, this is early on in the war, they said, you know, we have watched how the Americans fight. We've watched how you fight in our region. Okay, they've had since 1991, the first invasion of Iraq, and they've watched it. They watched Afghanistan, second war in Iraq, Syria, Libya. They've also watched how we have played a game in Ukraine, how we are fighting Russia vis-a-vis Ukraine. And they have watched that, and they've learned in 30 years of technology leapfrogging, and they've watched that, and they have been afraid of attacks from Israel. Why? Because Israel has periodically attacked them. Okay, so they have learned, we've taught them. The West, certainly Israel and the United States, has taught Iran how we like to fight and how we are designed to fight, far from our borders in our case. And they have learned from that. They have studied that, and they have come to the conclusion we are not going to be able to go head to head in a dogfight with an Israeli or American fighter jet. Okay, our intelligence may not be as good as theirs on the ground. They admit that. They are aware of that. Let's see, the other thing that they've learned, our Navy is a local Navy. It is the Straits of Hormuz Navy for the most part. It is not a global floating Navy. They have a few subs. I don't think they go too far from home. they have an army, and their army is quite well manned, and they have a multi-tiered army, which we don't have in this country. They don't have just a regular army. They have the IGRC, they have other forces, and they have militia type forces as well. So they have a multi-layered approach with fighting a land battle, if it comes to that, which would be an actual invasion, which we are not doing. And the other thing they do is they say we get bombed by powerful targeted air-launched missiles and ballistic missiles and that kind of thing periodically. So what do we have to do? Well, we have to have a military that has enough extra logistical capability and is distributed enough, and that is well hidden enough and is usable enough and is cheap enough that we can withstand some of it or a lot of it being attacked. And what's the last thing they do? They say, we are going to get Tehran will be hit. Our leaderships will be targeted. We know this. Why? We're not making it up. This is who Israel and the U.S. has targeted in the past. This is who we target when we go into other countries. We try to decapitate. So they know that we're going to do this. So what do? They have the mosaic system, the decentralized command and control system. So if the head of the snake that Trump likes to talk about is cut off, he didn't do much, because there's 1,000 heads of the snake, and they are able to operate in the name, in the mission of defending their country. So they've designed something that we have not designed ourselves for, because we thought, oh, we'll go in here and we'll do this and we'll do that. They designed for defense. They designed for a long war, and they designed for it specifically with the U.S. being the country that might prosecute that long war, or Israel being a country that might prosecute it. So they judged correctly, and we did not. That's really what this is about. I mean, what are we doing in our side? Running out of equipment, running out of munitions. That's what we're doing, because we didn't plan for the type of enemy that anyone with two eyes in their head could have seen that they would be. But we didn't plan for that.
So very quickly, before we will probably need to have you back for a revisit of this,
Yeah.
Colonel. But simply, what do you think happens next? Where do we go from here? Are we going to see a drawdown, an off-ramp by the Trump administration, or are we going in for the worst day yet, as Hegseth, I think, paraphrasing what he said today? Which hasn't happened yet, so I'm still waiting.
Yeah, well, first off, we know that the administration is very concerned, because they are worried about oil prices, and they're worried about investments and financial flows in the Gulf states, for sure, and obviously energy. And they're doing things like saying, oh, they're actually putting out propaganda in the Western media to manipulate the stock market. If you've noticed, that just happened. I think Trump said, oh, no, this will be over within a couple of days, and oil prices dropped again. But he was saying, so he is motivated by a great deal of concern of the global economy, certainly the European economy, the Western economies. That's one thing that concerns him. The other thing is that this war is not popular, and it has not become popular. So for us as Americans, our United States government is actually wanting an off-ramp. But Israel can't afford one, because Iran is holding the cards. Contrary to what Trump says, or Netanyahu or anybody else, Iran decides when this war ends. So we could stop fighting right now, put up a white flag. We're not lobbing anything over to Iran, and Iran will continue to hit Israel. See, they're not hitting American targets anymore, other than the bases, which they've pretty well already damaged in the Gulf and the GCC countries. But they are continuing to damage Israel, and they're quite capable of continuing to damage Israel in actually an increasing pace, because of they've already taken out a lot of the defensive air defense capability that Israel has. So Israel doesn't want us to quit, but DC and the American population and the Republican Party, who's worried about losing midterms, they do want Trump to find that off-ramp.
Thank you all very much for watching, everyone. We'll be back with Karen in the future. It's been an interesting conversation. Certainly some more things to debate, and we'll be entering into, well, more weeks, days of this, I'm sure. But thanks all very much for watching, Karen for joining, and we'll see you all soon. Take care.